What is up, my Timmies? Shannon here from the Trinisphere, where Timmy and Johnny and Spike battle over all things EDH. Coming at you with a Jarad Golgari Lich Lord deck tech. To celebrate the return to Ravnica, we decided our first episode is going to be, our first gameplay for the return of Trinisphere Season 3 will be a battle of old Ravnican commanders. So we all picked one Ravnican EDH legendary from Ravnica's past to play in one nostalgic battle royale. Jarad is a big fan favorite of mine because 6 or so years ago when he first came out, I said, wow, I can fling, activated ability fling, hells yes. I have a Lord of Extinction from Shard's Block, hells yes. So I immediately scooped up my Jarad, built a deck around him, and was not very successful. So I feel like a good end to Jarad's story would be, considering, you know, he may be dead in the actual story of Guilds of Ravnica, is to give him one last hurrah as the king of fling. But if you'd like to see some of the other decks that I'll be up against, the deck techs coming from Spike and coming from Johnny should be available on our YouTube as well. I'll link them in the description as well, so you can go see what they plan on playing in our matchup. And then you can tune in on Tuesday for our matchup. So we'll be having gameplays every other Tuesday, and we'll have our deck text coming out a little ahead of time so you can know what to anticipate. So be sure to check out, like, and subscribe on our YouTube page, the Trinisphere, so you can see those deck texts in anticipation of the actual battles. So, all right. So without further ado, let's dive right into the list. So. Quick history, or quick kind of like developmental notes. Worked pretty hard on Jarad. And whenever somebody thinks about Jarad and Golgari, they think dredge and they think goyfs. They think creatures who scale based on sizes of graveyards. So that is kind of the build I tried 6 years ago and the build I tried when I picked this card back up. But after playtesting it a bunch of times, I realized that the concept of dredging to make your creatures big enough to fling is slow and unreliable, because you need to get your dredge cards before you get your big beefy guys. If you get your Night Howler on turn 3, it's a 0/0, it dies when it enters the battlefield. You need to get your dredge cards accurately, and you can't get flooded out in theory, or else you spend all your time dredging up, you know, one Golgari Grave Troll, which isn't particularly good. It's a very slow strategy. So what I decided to go with here was more of a ramp-centric approach. Adopting some concepts from the Gitrog monster to power out as much mana as fast as possible, since Jarad requires 3 mana to activate. We want to be able to fling 2 or 3 creatures a turn, so we're going to want a ton of mana as we move along. And then also we moved a little bit away from Goyf style creatures that require power and or things in graveyard for power and toughness. We've minimized our usage of those and started to rely on some more classic good stuff Golgari creatures. So. Well, let's dive right in and talk about our Lannimator package. Like I said, it is a Gitrog monster-centric package, so we're going to have the ability to play cards out of our, or lands out of our graveyards. So we have Crucible and Remnant of Excavator, as well as Life from the Loam. And then Gitrog himself will be in here as well. He's a 6/6 for 5, so he draws us cards, puts things in our graveyards. Can't ask for more than that. Fling them when you need them. We also have in here World Shaper, which is kind of a splendid reclamation. I believe that's what it's called. Being able to put all of our lands from graveyard into play when it dies. I usually don't like relying on these death triggers for my effects unless I can control when they die. So having Jarad around to be able to trigger this when I want to prevents that whole, oh man, I hope this dies in combat. Oh, it got padded or condemned. So that was worthless. So being able to fling him, while only being able to fling 3 damage, is pretty powerful when you're able to put all your lands back into play. So. We also run Titanium Protector of Argoth, able to put an extra land back into play when we cast her. Also makes 5/3s. So we have this pretty minor package, only 6 or so cards that synergize with our lands and graveyards. But what we do have is every fetch that we can run. So we have all, I believe it's 7 in our color pie, all the way up to, you know, Polluted Delta, and Misty Rainforest up in here. All of them, even the ones that only produce one of our colors, because we want to be constantly putting lands in our graveyard and putting them back into play. That way we're able to consistently hit our land drops despite not having as powerful draw engines as you'd see in other decks like so. So we'll jump over to our dredge section to talk about what we'll be putting cards into graveyards. So you'll see it's also a pretty small section because we started to lean away from dredge as like the core mechanic of how the deck functions, being a little too unreliable and too slow. We did keep some of the classics, Mulch, Satyr Wayfinder, and Grizzly Salvage, all very powerful cards, as well as Stinkweed and a good dredger, one of my favorite dredgers. But our saucier ads have been Mesmeric Orb, as well as Altar of Dementia. Mesmeric Orb, whenever anyone untaps a permanent, they mill one. So you can throw this down, you know, late in the game. You could be on like turn 10, throw this card down, and then by the time it's your turn again, everyone has dumped a ton of cards in their graveyard, empowering the few creatures that care about that thing. So it's a very low investment, being only 2 mana, and being able to effectively mill dozens and dozens of cards over the span of a game. It's also a low threat profile, so people don't want to really waste their spells on it. But once they see this deck work and they see how quickly a Lord of Extinction can go from minor to lethal off of one Mesmeric Orb, then they'll be sure to probably blow it up next time. Of course, we have Altar of Dementia. We're able to turn our fatties into more graveyard chunks. It's instant speed too. It costs no mana, so if for whatever reason we're tapped out and we can't fling, then at least we can turn our big creatures into value if they're going to get board wiped or exiled from the game. So that's kind of how we're putting stuff into the graveyard. Landimator shows what we can do with the lands, so we'll go to the Reanimator section to talk about what we're going to do with the creatures. So now we're moving away from Dredge, so we don't have as many Reanimator spells as you normally see, and it's not a huge focus for the deck, but it is really nice being able to fling a giant creature, then reanimate that creature and fling it again in one turn for the price of maybe 8 mana. That is the kind of thing. That's the kind of play that people don't really see coming. So it can turn out to be lethal before they realize it. So with Reanimator spells, we have Classic Animate Dead. It's a little bit of a nombo because there's a negative on the power side, negative 1/0 on the power. But at 2 mana and a cheap monetary cost, this card's gonna be a solid ad. We have Demon of Dark Schemes, which is a little bit of a board wipe on a stick. It infests, neg-2s there, every creature, or all creatures other than itself, as well as it has a reanimation built on activated ability, depending on the creatures it kills. This is kind of a techier ad because I do know that I'm going to have a matchup against a token-centric deck. So when I know my matchup, what my opponents are playing, I'm going to try and minimize some of the cards that do literally nothing in that matchup, and play some cards that are a little bit more geared towards what they're doing, just to make our gameplays a little more interesting, and because we don't really get to see each other's decks until we sit down and play them, so we don't want there to be some kind of weird synergy that prevents one of us from being able to even show what they built. Dread Return, classic, being able to play out of its graveyard. Eternal Witness, always add that card, it's great. It's not truly Reanimator because it goes to your hand, but still that's strong enough when you need extra removal a second time around. Journey into Eternity, a new one that I'm trying out. Once again, I wouldn't play this card if I didn't have the consistent ability to trigger it myself, because nothing would be worse than putting this on a creature and then having that creature exiled. Just a complete waste of a card and mana. And of course it flips into, what is it, Atzal? Something like that. Cave of Eternity. And that's just a reanimating land. So for 5 and a tap, we can put a creature from graveyard back into play. Really great for flinging. We're talking about 9. If you have 9 mana at this point, which should be pretty feasible with the amount of ramp we're running in this deck, then you should be able to activate to put a creature back into play and then fling it every turn. We have Phyrexian Delver, able to put a creature directly back into play at the cost of its CMC. But it's a reanimating creature. I mean, it's reanimation on a stick, so we can also fling this guy too, if that's what we're going to do that turn. Victimize, super powerful, able to put 2 creatures into play. It puts them into play tapped, but we're going to mitigate that downside because it doesn't matter. We're flinging them anyways. So even if it does put them into play tapped, it didn't really matter because we were just going to use the other 6 of our 9 mana to just kill everyone by flinging those 2 creatures immediately. Whip of Erebos, not my favorite reanimation spell because it exiles, but it does give lifelink. And, we don't have to think of this deck as just sitting back behind our wall and flinging things at people slowly. We can also swing with these gigantic creatures if need be. So life gain pretty relevant, especially because I liberally use my life total as a resource, as people have probably seen in some of my videos. I am fully willing to go down to 1 life, and then sometimes I do regret that choice. So let's go over the fatties. We talked about how we put things into our graveyards. Now, how does the Golgari Lich Lord, the Fling King, kill people? So the two remaining Goyf-style creatures we had left in the deck are Bone Horde and Night Howler. Now these cards are riskier plays because, like I mentioned before, Night Howler in your starting hand is, you might as well mulligan, gets a dead card in your hand. It's going to be hard to put creatures in the graveyard at a rate fast enough to make this a good 3-drop. But he's a bestow, so he's able to be flung twice effectively. You attach him to a creature, fling that creature, he immediately comes into play, fling him again. Hopefully that could be a burst of damage that people don't expect, and it kills them, honestly. Like, it could outright kill them because they didn't do the math. They didn't realize the potential for the fact that he's able to be flung twice. Kind of the same thing with Bone Horde. He equips for 2 mana. So you fling the Germ if possible, and then for 2 mana, you're able to fling again for a little bit more damage over and over again. So it's one of these are the two kind of ones that I kept around because even though they have some downside as to how big they are, being keyed off of creatures, they are keyed off of creatures in all graveyards. So there's a much bigger upside than ones that are keyed off of my graveyard, like Splinter Fright, which I don't like, and ones that are keyed off individual opponents' graveyards, like Sewer Nemesis, which I don't like either. So these are a little bit stronger in that they see more graveyards. They're going to be larger on average, but also they have reuse potential. So going away from the Goyf-style creatures, we do have to mention Lord of Extinction, the King Goyf. But I don't really consider him as a riskier play because he counts any type of card in graveyard. And with all the fetches we have, there's probably not going to be a chance this guy is a 0/0 on turn 5. Very likely, I don't think I've ever seen a Lord of Extinction smaller than a 22. But, I mean, we do ramp in this deck, so it's feasible that we could cast him on turn 4, and he's kind of like just around a 5/5 for 5. But the upside on this guy, I mean, he's the king of fling when it comes to punching people in the face, getting in there, over their board, and into their dome. So he's going to be on average, a 30 plus power creature, and then with the reanimator spells that we have, or the ability to shuffle power around, or play him a second time, we should be able to lethal people really easily with Lord of Extinction. So additionally, we have one of my pet cards, my favorite cards. Try to play it way back when we built Jarad, and try to play it again. I'm still going to try and play it every single time. Death's Presence. That says whenever a creature I control dies, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature I control, where X is the power of the creature that died. So it allows us to shuffle the power of a creature around. This is one of those very subtly powerful cards that people don't realize what's about to happen. They're going to do the math wrong kind of thing. So, if your Lord of Extinction is a 20/20 and you fling him for 20, and all you have left is a measly Elvish Mystic, Death's Presence will move 20 counters to that Elvish Mystic, allowing you to fling him for 21. And then if you have a larger board of tokens and that kind of thing, you can shuffle a lot of power around really quickly, and people don't realize that the damage you're doing is accumulative as long as you have bodies to fling. So it's kind of one of those high risk, high reward cards. Doesn't really do anything, but I love it and I want to try and run it every single time. Because we're a little bit of Lanimator strategy, we have Centaur Vine Crasher. He keys off of lands in all graveyards, so synergistic with Mesmeric Orb as well as all our fetch lands. He also has a built-in recursion ability innately within himself that can be keyed off of our fetches as well. So he's really great for fling me, reanimate me, fling me, all built into one package. We have Lightning Greaves in here because sometimes these big fatties can go into the red zone and punch people if we need them to. Not a lot of them have evasion, so that's not going to be one of our core strategies. We're going to be sitting back and flinging more of the time, but the opportunity could present itself, and especially if you have your Whip of Erebos out, this is a serious way to gain a lot of life before you fling, kind of thing. So I do need to mention that he does not target. You sacrifice 8 creatures, so you can fling a shrouded creature of your own. It also is good for equipping him in case they are trying to prevent you from your main avenue of victory. Mana Gorger Hydra, one of the sketchier ads. I do like this card a lot, and multiplayer grows to enormous sizes very quickly. But it is not reanimation centric, because when you reanimate this, unlike Lord of Extinction and Vine Crasher and Bone Horde and all these other cards, this comes in as a 1/1 when it comes back. So it is not the best card to add in here, but for 3 mana, it's probably one of the bigger creatures. This guy grows very fast. The threat profile is fairly low. People don't want to use removal on him unless they're the one getting trampled over by this 9/9 that they had a hand in creating. We mentioned Night Howler being a great reusable flinger. We got Omnixilus in here, the Fallen. This is kind of a late add. I'm not a huge fan of this guy because this is, I mean, look at this. This is almost a 5-mana vanilla 3/3. But I was looking for a way to incidentally damage my opponents over this fan of the game. Doing 40 damage, I don't think is going to be a consistent possibility before they realize the threat that my deck is presenting. I think I wanted to add in a little bit of way to kind of like ding people and get them kind of to the higher 20s. I feel like I'd be much more comfortable bursting out the high 20s amount of damage before people realize how threatening my board state is. So I felt like Omnixilus would be one of those like smaller threats that slowly drains people, but you know, he has the potential to be flung for a lot of damage as well. Especially, you know, when we're playing a lot of fetches and stuff like that. So one of the only landfall cards I end up running. Skew's really good if we're putting a lot of cards in graveyards via Mesmeric or maybe Altar of Dementia. We don't want our opponents to be able to out-reanimate us, and that's something that happens sometimes. Sometimes they have a stronger reanimator deck because they aren't keyed in on doing something silly like flinging. Or they're able to recur the same creature multiple times. I mean, it's also notable that Skew's himself grows. He also gains his life, so he can counteract our Ancient Tomb and all those other ways that we're going to be paying life as fast as we can to get an advantage. Sepulchral Primordial, taking creatures out of their graveyard to fling at them. Nothing more fun than hitting them in the face with their own creatures. So he's able to get a lot of power on board depending on how the mill game has been going. Uvenwald Hydra, another sketchier ad. But I do like this guy due to the fact that we have some techie lands. We have Bajuka Bog, we have Rogue's Passage, able to get our Lord of Extinction into the red zone. So we want to be able to fetch some of these lands. You know, your Cabal Coffers and your Urborg Tombs of Yawgmoth, and you want to be able to fetch some of these lands at will if you need them. As well as he's going to be a big creature, you know. With the amount of ramp we're doing, and it's very land-centric. It's not rock-centric. We have a few dorks, but we're focusing on playing multiple lands a turn. So this guy is going to be either out real early, or he's going to be late and real big. So he'll be a good flingable guy, as well as ramping. He's still following the ramp strategy. We got Viral's packaging with our fatties, because of course he can turn one of our Goyf-style creatures in our bin into more power and toughness on the battlefield. He can scavenge our Night Howler, end up putting 17 counters on a guy in play. Somebody didn't realize that kind of thing could happen. So we also got Woodland Bellower, able to fetch us, you know, some of our toolboxy creatures. You can get our Reclamation Sage, or even a Wayward Sword Tooth if we need an extra power fling. So there's a couple of cards in here that work well with him, but he's just kind of one of those things where he can get more than 6 power for 6 mana, as well as deal with certain problem areas. So that's the bulk of like the main what the concept of the deck is. Like I said, I went over this deck. I play tested it a bunch. I didn't like having to focus on dredge. I decided to narrow it down, not so focused on Goyf style creatures, and start using some of the more standard good stuff creatures. Because after witnessing what Ghalta can do without requiring Goyfs to cheese power and toughness via creatures in graveyards, Ghalta decks are able to power out a huge amount of power without using any cheap tricks. So I kind of followed that strategy, being like, well, instead of trying to cheese, or instead of trying to forego ramp for dredge, trying to cheat the power and toughness curve, why don't we just lean directly into the power and toughness curve and start playing some of the better, you know, green cards that are now available. So that's kind of where we're leaning into. We could talk about our ramp real quick. Like we said, we're very land-centric, so we're going to run a Zusa. I don't really like running a Zusa that often in decks, unless you're really drawing a lot of cards. Because if you don't draw a lot of extra cards, this is about as good as a Cultivate, a very expensive Cultivate. But we are playing, as you've seen, a lot of Lanimator, Crucible, and Ruminap Excavator, as well as Exploration. So we'll be very consistently able to play up to 3 lands a turn when this girl is out. So we got a couple of dorks, Birds, Elvish, and Lanoirs, because these provide us bodies in the graveyard if they come out early and die, fueling some of our Goyf-style things. Also, they can be victimized. Very great return on investment. They're turning a Llanowar Elves into a Lord of Extinction and a Centaur Vinecrasher. But also they can carry Night Howler and Bonehorde if we need them to. So they are kind of the ramp bodies that are able to be flung in these kind of edgier cases. We have Oracle Modiah, probably the best green card in Magic. Circu Tribeldor, another body. Rampant Growth on a stick, real good. We have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, excellent card. Kind of expensive now, but what a crazy card. Adding green to our pool equal to the power of our biggest creature, and then whenever we play the biggest creature in the battlefield, we draw a card. Loving running Selvala in here. We also have Wayward Swordtooth, another one that can add an additional land into play. It's 3 mana 5/5, so that's really good for our flinging strategy anyways. We also have Chefette Monitor. Not exactly sure, you know, I kind of went into like a crazy fevered state brewing this deck, so somehow this guy ended up making the cut. Whether or not that is going to be the case, you know, a week or two from now, I don't know, but you know, I do like this guy on his face value. He cycles for 4 mana, puts a land into play tapped, a basic or a desert into play tapped, and draws you a card, and puts a body in the graveyard. So that's kind of his main use case, but also, you know, worst case scenario, he's a 6 mana 6/5, so he's on power curve for flinging. It's probably a little under what green is capable of now these days, but also you can Virals, you know, for a chunk of mana, you can cycle him and then Virals him. So he's somehow made the cut. Going into draw power, you have Disciple of Bolas. That's kind of a gimme, right? Like we're playing huge powered creatures, then let's draw a lot of cards. I'm a big fan of Disciple. I almost always run him in my big body Timmy decks. He's a creature himself, so he can be victimized to reanimate the thing that he killed, he ate. He also gains us some life, and he can be reanimated to do it again. So I like all these things. I love it. I love reanimator decks that have all the utility come out of the creatures. We ran Elemental Bond in here over Phyrexian Arena because we have the ability to trigger it more than once per turn very consistently. I think we'll get a return on investment much faster with Elemental Bond over Phyrexian Arena. We have Garruk Primal Hunter in here as a burst draw spell, basically a Soul's Majesty, but he can +3 to create 3/3s. Notable that it feeds into our Elemental Bond to draw us more cards, gives us bodies to fling at people, but also it gives us a steady stream of defenders, because sometimes when you're running Jarad, you're constantly flinging things for almost no reason whatsoever. You're just like, at the end of my opponent's turn, I'm going to fling my biggest creature, which is not necessarily the best strategy because it leaves you basically defenseless. It leaves you struggling, tapping out constantly, trying to play creatures to not get hammered by everyone. So this deck kind of went for a few more angles that are burstier, able to pump out more damage more effectively, but also ramp so that we can do a lot of stuff on our turn. But producing a steady stream of 3/3 tokens is also pretty good. Being able to defend ourselves at a pretty decent rate. Greater Good, another Disciple of Bolas-esque card, very, very powerful for sacrificing creatures. Also puts stuff in our graveyard at will, so it can feed some of our remaining Goyf-style creatures. Read the Bones, excellent black card. Just run that one whenever you're playing black. It's a great draw card. Rishkar's Expertise, and then of course Sylvan Library. We'll skip over to the removal section and look at what we got going here. Some classics like Abrupt Decay. We're also running Broken Bond. So I ran this one because I felt like I needed a way early game, because I believe Jarad is a pretty slow deck, a way early game to kind of disrupt the strategies of my opponents while not feeling like I'm wasting a premium removal spell. So the fact that this is play an extra land, which is directly up our alley, coupled with a destroy one of their good rocks or good enchantments they're playing early on, I felt like it was a pretty strong add for early game play. Golgari Charm fitting into that area where I mentioned knowing a little bit about what my opponent's playing means I'm going to run a little bit less. I do know one of my opponents is going to be running Teysa, Orzhov, Scion, so I'm going to lean a little bit away from targeted removal or sack effects, edicts, and go for a little bit more like techier, you know, board wipes, and or, you know, this thing has a lot more upside too, being able to destroy enchantments and also regen my board. Corrosive Grip needs no introduction. Life's Finale is not my favorite board wipe, but being able to put some things into their graveyard and then Sepulchral Primordial them, or maybe Demon of Dark Schemes that card into play, it feels like a bit of a fun techier kind of move there. Massacrum, one of my favorite cards, another edict or another kind of infest style play that also damages them. And then also I added the Knight Incarnate, one of the new ones from Commander, the most recent Commander EDH product. This guy, when he leaves the battlefield, does -3 to the board. It's notable that some of these effects do hit us, but we're gonna have such a high average toughness that we can afford to, you know, Toxic Deluge casually for 7 and still have most of our board survive, or some of our key pieces survive. So this guy, he felt like he's pretty good. He's a 3/4 Death Toucher, so you can just play him as a defender. People are gonna have a hard time running into him. And then when you're ready, you can fling them to zap a bunch of their utility creatures. We do got Noxious Gearhulk in here for targeted removal for specific creatures. Great Reanimator, great life gain engine. Along with Rex Sage, good for those non-creature stuffs, as well as Terrastodon and Woodfall Primus. These guys are just huge, right? Like, this guy is a 9/9. Even if you're not even thinking about blowing up your own stuff to make more bodies, which is the saucier of plays, but even if you don't do that, you're blowing up some of their best stuff and creating a 9/9 while you're at it. Giving them 3/3s is not necessarily a bad thing. We produce a lot of power and toughness. They're not going to be able to swing with those 9/9s, and we're not really planning on swinging. So, one of the things I hate doing is giving my opponents blockers that are good at blocking, swan songing against my flying commander. But in this deck, we're not planning on attacking that much, so it's totally fine to give them a bunch of 3/3s and then fling this 9/9 at them after we blow up most of their combo pieces. Toxic Deluge, like I mentioned, excellent in this deck. It's even better in this deck than most because our creatures on average will be able to survive some of the X's that we pick when it comes to how big they are. Woodfall Primus, like I said, just like Terrastodon. This one actually flings for 11 due to its persist, as well as getting 2 naturalized triggers. So it was really hard. I almost cut one of them. I sat there and I evaluated, and I'm like, what is the upside? This one flings for a total of 11 twice. This one flings once for 9. This one gives them creatures, but this one, I went over it. This one has trample. I went over it a bunch, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to run both of them. I know I really shouldn't, but they're so good in this deck that I'm going to run both anyways. All right, so we talked about our draw, our ramp, and our removal, our core pieces. We talked about our landmation strategy, our reanimation strategy, our dredge, and our fatties. We can go over the lands real quick too. We have Ancient Tomb. I always run Ancient Tomb. It's just a ramp spell for me. I also run Temple of the False God in here. I usually don't run that one, but we have enough ramp that I'm going to justify the extra risk of running this card. We got Svogthos, the Restless Tomb. For 5 mana, this becomes a Goyf-style creature. We got Strip Mine in here too, but we're not really going to plan on doing Strip Mine Crucible World strategies unless everyone starts playing dirty. That's just in here more to take out key land pieces that could be powering other people's decks. But if they do get down on dirty, we will too. We got Rogue's Passage as well as a way to get our Lord of Extinction into the red zone. And then we got, some sack outlets. We got Phyrexian Tower, and we got High Market as other ways to sack our creatures. Maybe to get our Death's Presence trigger when people aren't looking. And then, of course, we have 7 fetches and a fairly low amount of basics, which is one thing that does worry me. I'm going to keep an eye on. With this many fetches and to be able to recur them that much, it's going to be pretty easy to run out of basics because at enemy colors, you really only have 2 actual duels. And this one only has Bayou and Overgrown Tomb. There's just they haven't printed enough enemy color fetchable duels like the Amonkhet's Cycling Lands and the Battle for Zendikar Tango lands, I guess, are sometimes called. So I do have to monitor the basic land usage, see how often I run out of basics, and how I may need to up the count at the cost of some of these other cards. But so that's kind of a rundown of how I came about my Jarad Golgari Lich Lord list. Like I said, I had built them once before, focusing really heavy on dredge, and I didn't like it. It was too consistent. It wasn't very consistent, and it wasn't very fast. It was very slow to build up. And it was easy to see what I was about to do for people, and it was easy to disrupt. This time around, I went for an approach that's much faster, using a lot of mana ramp early on in order to set up much bigger plays, the ability to activate them twice per turn. And then we're using a little bit of Reanimator in order to cheese some of our big, beefier creatures out twice in a row, whether it be flinging Lord of Extinction, reanimating, and flinging again. Some of these plays and avenues are going to be a little bit harder for opponents to see. And more likely to blow them out very quickly. So that's kind of it for my deck tech. We're going to be doing these going into our gameplay matches the week leading up. So you'll be able to stay tuned this Tuesday for us using these lists against each other in our Battle of the Old Ravnican Commanders. You can check us out on YouTube. You'll be able to see the deck techs from the Johnny who's playing Teysa Orzhov Scion. And the Spike who's playing Circu Dimir Lobotomist. It's kind of crazy. I'm excited to see that list in action. We'll have to see how it goes. But if you guys want to check out some of our other content, you can hit us up. Obviously, our YouTube is our main avenue of producing or releasing our content. So we'll have new content coming out every Tuesday. It'll alternate between gameplays and podcasts. So you can listen to us argue, battle over all things from our 3 different points of view, and then you can watch us take our concepts to the battlefield and compete against each other with different brews. You can also follow us on Twitter, and so you can keep track of what we're up to, which GPs we're going to, and what EDH what kind of shenanigans we're up to. You can follow Ryan, our Spike, at Snapmaster. You can follow me, Shannon, the Timmy, at Nikki Bolus, and you can follow our Johnny, Adam, at Squire9999. And then, of course, you can follow Ryan when he's playing some of his 1v1 MTGO matchups on Twitch. And then we'll also be streaming content occasionally. I like to stream Smashed Up, which is a kind of a fun little battle box based off of budget decks built around the partner commanders. They're like 15 half decks that you just randomly pick 2 and you shuffle them together and to make one full EDH deck on a $50 budget, and you battle it out, and then we have a drinking game built around it. So come watch us make fools of ourselves, and every time we miss a trigger, if you call us out on it, we will have to drink. You can also join our discussions on Facebook.com at the Trinisphere, and you can check out our show's Twitter at the Trinisphere. So, all right, guys, take it easy, and hopefully the King of Fling will get there this week. And as always, it's not about winning, it's about sending a message.